You know how to whistle, don't you?
You just put your lips together and...
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. If you are a returning viewer, you already know how this works, but for anyone that might be new here, I have a recurring series where I do videos discussing source material books ahead of their adaptations being released into the cinema. Then once the films get released, I review them. There's a playlist of everything I've covered thus far. The next adaptations that will release, which I've already published source material videos on, are People We Meet on Vacation, Wuthering Heights, Reminders of Him, The Dog Stars, and Verity. So feel free to watch those if you want to get prepared for adaptations that are coming up next. I've never done any YouTube videos on The Hunger Games, but I have discussed them over on Patreon as I read the other books first to prepare to read Sunrise on the Reaping. I had already seen all of the films, but this was my first time reading the books. First, I will share an abbreviated introduction to the Hunger Games series and my feedback of those other stories, just so that we can lead into this newest installment and its upcoming adaptation, Sunrise on the Reaping. I'm also going to assume that if you are watching this video, you've at least watched one Hunger Games film, or you have a basic understanding of the premise simply by way of pop culture osmosis. The original book trilogy was adapted into 4 films. That entire book trilogy is superior to those films. There's a lot more world building, the themes are better developed. I'm not interested in reading YA fiction for recreation, as I prefer to read books written for adults, but I wanted to read these stories because one of the primary reasons I do this series is to study the adaptation process and get a sense of which stories are being chosen by the industry to get their own adaptations, especially into the cinema. Also, I like to promote libraries. This is a library book, which I borrowed to make this video, and once I'm finished, I will be returning it. If you ever watched the Hunger Games films from the 2010s and found yourself wishing that there was more lore and world building explained, I would definitely recommend to read those books because that's where it is. The first Hunger Games that the readers or film audience experiences is the 74th Hunger Games. And then the second one that happens in Catching Fire is the 75th Hunger Games. In the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which was the next book and film in the series, but that is also a prequel, one that takes place much earlier on than Sunrise on the Reaping. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes happens around the 10th Hunger Games and serves as an origin story of Coriolanus Snow, who is the president of Panem during the original trilogy. He's played by Donald Sutherland in those 4 films, and in this prequel film, he's played by Tom Blythe. For this book and film, I think it's more worth it to both read the book and watch the film because when you're reading the book, you really get a greater sense of how duplicitous Coriolanus Snow is. You will read, in no uncertain terms, him thinking one thing and then saying the exact opposite of that. He's sneaky, he's a liar, he's entitled, he's the type of man to lie about his political beliefs to try to trick a woman with more progressive views than him into dating him.
Back
whoa.
fuck up!
Okay,
Get away from me, all of you!
But with the film, you are able to have a broader scope of the story, as well as the world of that story, because you're not stuck following just one character's point of view. You can see what Lucy Gray is getting up to in the tunnels when she's in the Hunger Games, but in the book, the cameras are not down there, so you can only see whatever Coriolanus is able to see whenever Lucy emerges back out into the main part of the arena that the games are taking place in. Now, we reach Sunrise on the Reaping, which takes place during the 50th Hunger Games, which is a quarter quell. If you didn't already know this, quarter quells refer to the games that happen every 25 years. 25, 50, 75. Also, if it wasn't already clear, full spoilers for this story and all of the Hunger Games stories that have been published thus far. Quarter quells will make alterations to the format. In the 75th Hunger Games, instead of the normal batch of children from each district being the ones eligible to have their names drawn to compete as tributes, the tributes were instead chosen from a much smaller pool of people, those being previous victors of the games, people who have already been in the Hunger Games and won, which was something unheard of up until then. Let's read the blurb inside the Sunrise on the Reaping cover. As the day dawns on the 50th annual Hunger Games, fear grips the district of Panem. This year, in honor of the quarter quell, twice as many tributes will be taken from their homes. Back in District 12, Haymitch Abernathy is trying not to think too hard about his chances. All he cares about is making it through the day and being with the girl he loves. When Haymitch's name is called, he can feel all his dreams break. He's torn from his family and his love, shuttled to the capital with the 3 other District 12 tributes, a young friend who's nearly a sister to him, a compulsive oddsmaker, and the most stuck-up girl in town. As the games begin, Haymitch understands he's been set up to fail, but there's something in him that wants to fight, and have that fight reverberate far beyond the deadly arena. Haymitch, for anyone who doesn't remember, was played by Woody Harrelson in the original batch of Hunger Games films. He was the mentor for District 12 because he was the one and only victor from that district who was still around. The only other victor to come from District 12 was Lucy Gray, who was the winner in the Ballad of Songbirds Snakes. But as you should know, if you either saw the film or read the book or both, she went and disappeared at the end of that story. Once Snow rose to power, he has kept the footage of that year's games hidden. It's never used in the highlight reels, and Lucy Gray is not around to live in the Victor's Village, which now exists, or mentor the tributes in the games that have happened in the many decades that followed after her victory. When Lucy Gray competed in the 10th Hunger Games, there were capital students assigned to mentor the tributes. Coriolanus Snow mentored Lucy Gray. By the time we reach the 50th Hunger Games, the year of Haymitch's victory, the system of previous victors from a particular district being the ones to mentor the tributes of that same district is up and running. However, since District 12 doesn't have any prior victors that are around to do that job, victors from other districts are instead assigned to mentor the 4 tributes from District 12. More specifically, we have Mags and Wyrus. This brings me to one of my favorite things about this story. We get to see many of the key players who were involved in the rebellion that we saw in action through Catching Fire and even more so in Mockingjay, doing more or less the same thing but decades before. They have been trying to overthrow the oppressive capital for all of that time, maybe even longer, because we don't know exactly how long these characters have been part of the rebellion. But at minimum, it's 25 years. So we could probably round that up to roughly 30 years or so, depending on which character we're talking about. They didn't come up with this plan yesterday. They would have had to do a lot of brainstorming, planning, recruiting, gathering intel. There are a lot of moving parts to overthrowing a dictatorship. Even when I was reading the earlier books, that first trilogy, one of the things that kept me from being able to fully connect with the material is that I wanted to be in the thick of the rebellion. Katniss, more often than not, does not know what the rebellion is doing. There are people who are older, more intelligent, more experienced, that are the ones doing a lot more work in the rebellion than she is. But because these are YA books that are first and foremost aimed at a younger audience who is probably not involved with that sort of work in real life, these stories are not focusing on a main character who is already actively involved in the groups that are going to defeat the oppressive regime in power. Haymitch's girlfriend Lenore is far more intelligent and active. She repeatedly does things to try to fight back or sabotage the oppressive branch of power that terrorizes District 12. She'll try to sabotage executions. She has repeatedly gotten in trouble with the peacekeepers. If Snow hadn't conspired to take her out at the end of this story in retaliation against Haymitch, she would have been in the rebellion, 100%. Given the popularity of this book, I'm assuming that most folks who are particularly interested in the story will have either already read the book or watched any number of other videos that have done a very detailed recap of the plot. So I would like to talk about some of the casting choices, how the legacy characters fit into the other Hunger Games stories, as well as this one, because that's where a lot of my own interest in these stories comes in. I like the lore, I like getting more of an insight into the rebellion as a group. If you will remember, Catching Fire introduced readers, or viewers, to characters like Plutarch, Mags, Wyrus, Beatty, all of whom are part of the rebellion. All of these characters are important characters in Sunrise on the Reaping because at this point they are already involved with trying to take down the capital. There are some other characters we already know who are around, but they're not as cool because they're not part of the rebellion. For example, Caesar Flickerman is in Sunrise on the Reaping. He's got the same job as he did in the original trilogy, but this is earlier in his career. So instead of Stanley Tucci, we have Kieran Culkin playing the character. And that makes sense to me. I've never watched Succession.
You're basically white.
That's true.
Name every character on Succession.
Logan, Kendall, Shiv, Roman. Oh, you got me.
I don't really watch a whole lot of television anymore. I'll do it once in a while, but I prefer to prioritize watching and covering films because doing so allows me to experience a greater variety of stories, and also because I'm here first and foremost for the cinema. Direct-to-streaming model? Get it away from me.
You can't make love to a salad.
But the first thing I think of when I think of Kieran Culkin is that Actors on Actors session he did with Coleman Domingo not that long ago. The absolute chaos of that conversation. Yes, that's Caesar Flickerman.
I'm 54.
Get the fuck!
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be so loud.
I'll be 55
I would have guessed
on
10 years
Thanksgiving.
younger than that.
10
No
years
shit.
younger, yeah.
Yeah, look at you.
It's hydrating and, you know,
You moisturize?
I'm black.
Yeah. Oh, that. Oh, you are.
That'll do it.
I didn't notice.
An earlier version of Effie Trinket is in Sunrise on the Reaping. She is much earlier on in her career. In the original films, she was played by Elizabeth Banks, but in Sunrise on the Reaping, she's played by Elle Fanning. The main stylist for District 12 at this point in history is named Magno, and he's played by Billy Porter. He's not good at his job. He uses the same tired coal mining concept for the outfits of District 12's tributes year after year. He's also prone to indulging in illicit substances, which make him unreliable at things like showing up on time, getting his job done. And at one point when he's MIA, Effie shows up to save the day because she has the skills needed to do this job well, and her sister Prosperina was already on the team that helps the tributes to get ready. This version of Effie is fully brainwashed and fully indoctrinated by the Capitol's propaganda. So the only compliments we will be bestowing on her in this film is beautiful gowns. You don't see the arc of the character, the growth, the realization that, oh, well, maybe you should have empathy for the citizens of the districts and the horrific brutality they're subjected to until we get to the original trilogy. But I happen to be fresh off of watching Predator Badlands twice at the cinema, so that kind of whimsical, zany energy that Effie has, I would definitely say that Elle is a good choice for that part. Back in District 12, you get a quick introduction to Katniss's parents. That was interesting because even though in the films his importance is downsized, in the books there are far more details about how important Katniss's father is to her becoming the person she is. He taught her how to hunt, he taught her rebel songs, or maybe it was just the one, but either way, the love that family had for him and how badly the loss of him ripped through their family, it's very significant. I'm ambivalent about seeing them popping up in the film, though, because they whitewashed Katniss and Gale in the films. But Katniss is indigenous, and you won't convince me otherwise. And Gale is said to resemble her to enough of an extent that they could claim to be related. They've recently announced that Jennifer Lawrence and Josh Hutcherson will be making an appearance in this film. Presumably, that would be for the epilogue. They have not announced Woody Harrelson yet, but I am assuming that they're working on him, or they're waiting to announce him. Maybe they need to find carrier pigeons that can reach Woody because he's not easy to get a hold of. He stays out of the way. He stays out of the commotion. You cannot directly contact him. And that is a bit iconic, I must say. I'm envious. If Sunrise on the Reaping was its own isolated story that wasn't obligated to follow the lore of the stories that were published before it, I would have said that this should have been about Lenore, because Lenore is that girl. She is smarter than Haymitch. He even thinks that in the book. She's ready to do property damage, sabotage. She should be running the youth division of the rebellion. If you don't already know this about me, when I'm not reading fiction to research, study, and make videos about source material, do you know what I'm reading? Non-fiction history books. Do you want some recommendations? Well, I thought you would never ask. Recently, I read this, To Kill a Nation by Michael Parenti. The amount of rage and devastation that was surging through my body, it was a lot. When I was in chapter 12, and they described something happening in real life that was more or less the exact same tactics that resulted in the death of Primrose Everdeen in the Hunger Games, well, all I saw was fury and despair. And the next history book I'm about to read is this, The Assassination of Fred Hampton by Jeffrey Hawes. The first thing I did after checking this book out of the library was I looked through the pictures they include in the middle of this book, and I was so deeply upset looking at them because of how young he is. You can see it in his face. The feds got him when he was 21. If you've watched the Sunrise on the Reaping teaser trailer, you may or may not have noticed that they don't actually show Haymitch's name being called during the reaping. And that feels like an intentional nod to the people who know the story already, because his name wasn't actually called. There was a different boy, well, two boys, whose names were called, One of them tried to run off, and he ended up getting pew-pewed by a peacekeeper. That dead boy's mother became hysterical, understandably so she was trying to stop other peacekeepers from taking her son's body away. Lenore Dove was trying to help this woman because Lenore Dove is exactly who we think she is. She's in a league of her own. She is the standard. She's the blueprint. The rebellion would be successful much sooner if everyone in the districts was more like her. Haymitch sees this commotion happening, and he's a loving boyfriend, so he runs up to try to help Lenore. And what do you know? Haymitch gets snatched up, and then it's decided that he could be the boy's replacement. Now, all of this commotion doesn't actually get aired because by this point in the history of the Hunger Games, they have an internal safety net in the system where they're not broadcasting live. They are on a slight delay so they can work things out quickly in the short bit of time they have and create a cover-up. Haymitch gets chosen to be the replacement tribute, and Plutarch is there for all of this because he's working as a cameraman, but in a way he's also a bit of a story producer. You know, the people who will make sure that reality shows have enough footage that they will need to be able to put together a good story in the edit? It's a bit like that, but worse. This younger version of Plutarch is played by Jesse Plemons. Now, I don't envy anyone that has to follow in the footsteps of Philip Seymour Hoffman. The way that man was acting circles around more or less everyone in all of his jobs, wow. But Jesse Plemons, of Like Mike fame, we're in good hands. He will be one of those characters that I will watch next year on the big screen and think to myself, well, why don't you have more screen time? Because that's exactly how I felt when I was rewatching the original Hunger Games films and encountered any scenes with Donald Sutherland, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Jenna Malone, just to name a few of them. Getting insight into Plutarch was fascinating, though, because he comes from a highly privileged background, generationally so, in the capital. So the fact that someone who has everything to gain from an oppressive status quo would still somehow find the moral fiber to join the rebellion, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. So he saves Lenore Dove's life after Drusilla had ordered she be executed by saying that she could be used on camera as part of Haymitch's story. And later on, Plutarch also arranges for Haymitch to be able to talk to Lenore on the phone the night before the Hunger Games was set to begin. Lenore had been jailed for her rebellious ways. We love her for that. And she's in jail for more or less the entirety of Haymitch being away in the capital. Haymitch is constantly skeptical of Plutarch, understandably so, since he's a vulnerable teenager who just got taken away from his home and loved ones and forced into the horrific Hunger Games. And Plutarch is a generationally elite person from the capital. I would also be suspicious. But when I read the book, I always assumed Plutarch was decent because we saw that he was still part of the rebellion in the original trilogy. He was instrumental to the plan that eventually brought down Snow's regime. And also, even though I am adamant that the original book trilogy is far better than those 4 film adaptations, movie Plutarch is Philip Seymour Hoffman, so I always remember him. The look on Philip Seymour Hoffman's face when he is watching Julianne Moore pretend to be sad about Katniss dying. Obviously, we know Katniss wasn't really dead, but she thought that Katniss was. I would happily replay that one moment just to feel something. How do you expect me to focus on the teenage characters when Philip Seymour Hoffman is Philip Seymour Hoffmaning all over the screen? It's impossible. I don't know how long Sunrise on the Reaping's runtime will be, but I would happily take a 2.5 hour or even a 3-hour runtime if it meant that all of the really interesting adult characters would get more runtime. Specifically, Plutarch, Beatty, Mags, Wyrus, and of course, the big bad himself, President Snow, who will be played by Ralph Fiennes. He's no stranger to playing a villain, but also Conclave. Oh, that movie was so messy in a really fun way. It's full of conspiring, secrecy, scheming. So Ralph Fiennes can slip into this role and this environment like it's an outfit that's been tailor-made specifically for him. And the way that Snow doesn't respond well to Haymitch's rebellious spirit, stunts, and antics, I don't think Snow's retaliations are just because he's a megalomaniac. I think it's also because Haymitch is from District 12. Among the many details of lore that are learned from the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, there's definitely a sense of Snow being an example of one of those men who has one bad breakup and makes it everyone's problem for as long as he lives. Lucy Gray was a tribute from District 12. Who are the tributes we've read Snow having the biggest personal gripes with? Haymitch Abernathy and Katniss Everdeen. And where were they from? District 12. If this wasn't clear enough already, if you would like to read the book, Sunrise on the Reaping, as preparation for the film adaptation releasing in November of 2026, I would say that it's important to read the other books first, because Sunrise on the Reaping threads things together from both directions of that world's timeline. Haymitch, because of different encounters he has with Snow, correctly deduces that the one tribute from District 12 that has won before was a Covey girl whom Snow had mentored and had some sort of further entanglement with. I don't know how much the film will try to communicate that, because, as is often the case, the book will share a lot of information with readers by way of the character's thoughts. Haymitch has this realization in his mind, and there's a lot of details about his life, his beliefs, and what he decides to do at various points that are all happening in his mind. Film adaptations always have to rework the material in books to find a way to deliver the most important pieces of that information in some other way so that the audience can still know what we need to know, even if we haven't read the book first. Any sort of rebellious spirit from District 12 is going to remind Snow of Lucy Gray, so he's going to take it more personally. He threatens Haymitch as a way of informing him of the status quo, but Haymitch does what Haymitch does, which is why, when Haymitch finally gets to return to District 12 after winning the Hunger Games, the first thing he sees is smoke in the distance. Well, what's the smoke coming from? His family home! Arson!
Homicide.
With Haymitch's mother and younger brother fatally trapped inside. And then when Haymitch gets to finally reunite with Lenore Dove, she is fatally poisoned by some gumdrops that Snow left for her. But she had believed that they were from Haymitch because Haymitch would always gift her gumdrops because she really enjoys them. Oh my god! Normally, the gumdrops are rainbow colored, but the ones Snow gave her were blood red. And why is that? Because he's a messy diva, and he's a stunt queen who lives for the theatrics of it all, even when he's being evil and nefarious. Lenore's final words to Haymitch are to tell him to not let another sun rise on the reaping. That's right, you thought I was a Lenore Dove hype woman only because she's a rebel, a revolutionary that was taken out too soon? Well, I'm not the only one who thinks she's an icon, because she's the one who gets to do the title drop. In Chapter 1, she and Haymitch have this conversation where she's the one that has a clear understanding that the horrible way that things are do not have to stay that way. They can, in fact, change them. And she asks Haymitch to imagine the sun rising on a world without a reaping. Her last words aren't some cliched, "I love you" sentiment. Her final message is to tell him to become a rebel. Don't let the sun rise on the reaping. Sure, I mean, it took another 25 years to actually successfully complete that mission, but better late than never. In the epilogue, which takes place after the original book trilogy, Haymitch tells Katniss and Peeta about the story we've just read in Sunrise on the Reaping, including everything to do with Lenore Dove, and as a result, Katniss gifts Haymitch some geese for him to take care of because that's something that Lenore had done when she was alive. Haymitch also imagines Lenore, but a version of her that is an adult like him, still being there with him after all those years. There is no reason to bring back Katniss and Peeta if we're not going to also see Woody Harrelson at the end of this movie. I don't want to see them if he's not there. And speaking of rebellion, let's talk about some true icons in our midst. Wyrus, Beetee, and Mags. By the way, Mags speaks in this story, but otherwise her personality is largely the same. She's extremely warm and loving. She's exactly whom you would want to have around when you're having a bad day, when you're going through a crisis, and you need a hug. Mags is from District 4. That's the aquatic fishing swimming district. The same one that Finnick Odair came from, but his Hunger Games take place after this book. Mags was originally played by Lynn Cohen, but in this film she is played by Lily Taylor, who is a fabulous choice. Mystic Pizza, Hemlock Grove. Oh, I have full confidence that she will be the loving maternal figure that will have all of us in the audience ready to weep in any and every scene where she's not just training these tributes, but supporting them emotionally. Wyrus is from District 3, which is the technology district, and she is fresh off of winning the Hunger Games. This is the year after she won. She and Mags are mentoring District 12. Wyrus was originally portrayed by Amanda Plummer, daughter of the man who, in my childhood brain, raised me, Christopher Plummer. And in the new film, Sunrise on the Reaping, she will be portrayed by Maya Hawke, whom I mostly like for blowing the whistle and revealing that Hollywood producers are making casting decisions based on Instagram followers. That's heinous. I hate that. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. Wyrus's backstory is kind of hilarious, and if the budget will allow it, I hope they'll film enough material for a quick highlight reel of her victory in the Hunger Games, because the 49th Hunger Games was one where the arena was full of shiny, reflective surfaces, which meant that all of the contestants were highly disoriented the entire time they were in the arena. She was able to follow light beams and navigated the setup well enough to find a blind spot at a rock near the lake. So she just sat on this rock and the other tributes could see her, but they could never quite manage to reach her because they couldn't reach her, they would only reach reflective images of her. She never had to raise a hand against any of the tributes. The last surviving tribute besides her tried to get her, and then he cracked his head after he tried to jump at her and he drowned in the lake. She also couldn't even get sponsor gifts delivered to her because even the game maker struggled to find the blind spot she was in. Let that be proof that women in STEM. Ladies, study up on that. I might add some science books to my reading list next. I've been very preoccupied with the nonfiction history books, but next time I'm at the library picking up my next book haul, I will have to have a look around and see what they have there. Wyrus was mentored by Beatty, who was once again a mentor during the 50th Hunger Games, but for District 3, which is where he and Wyrus are both from. I love the idea that Mags or Wyrus are not as valued in this oppressive world, which is why they're assigned to mentor District 12. And then what happens? A District 12 tribute won the games. It feels like yet another foreshadowing of how those three are the ones that Katniss chose to be her allies in catching fire. They're all people with upstanding character and bravery that compels them to be part of the rebellion. But now, I have to talk about Beatty. When I saw the cast list of this film, I knew that they were specifically trying to get me invested in this adaptation because the actor portraying young Beatty is Kelvin Harrison Jr. If you don't know who Kelvin Harrison Jr. is, well, I will tell you who he is. B.B. King, Chevalier. When you play a prominent role in 2 5-star films back to back, I will notice. Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, 5 stars. Chevalier, 5 stars. And now he's a science nerd trying to overthrow a dictator? Absolutely. Pass the popcorn. I will pre-order my ticket right now. And if you thought that Snow was my enemy just for his usual evil ongoings, for going after Haymitch, no. He not only orchestrated the death of Lenore Dove, he's going after Beatty. See, Beatty, he's a rebel in STEM. So he tried to sabotage the Capitol's communication system before this. And as punishment for this, his 12-year-old son, Ampert, gets reaped into the games, and Beatty has to mentor him. A 12-year-old in the Hunger Games? Now, I'm not saying they have no chance, but it's highly improbable. Finnick Odair eventually wins at the age of 14, which is a record for the youngest victor. Beatty covertly tells Haymitch about a plan to sabotage the games that eventually Haymitch and Ampert will attempt to do together. Essentially, they need to try to set off some explosives that they will use to try to flood the on-site control room of the games. Ampert is my child. Ampert is all of our child. We will not stand for any Ampert slander. And the same goes for Beatty. Beatty is having to keep his cool, maintain a level-headedness, while his child is being put on the chopping block, and instruct both that child and another child whom he does not know how to do rebellion, find the control room, how to assemble the explosives necessary to fulfill this job. Beatty is stronger than an entire army of peacekeepers, and you will not tell me otherwise. The way that these actors are going to breathe life into these rebellion members, that's what I'm showing up to see first and foremost. Now, don't get me wrong. Learning about Haymitch's backstory is interesting lore and world building. And being able to experience more lore and backstory and world building is one of the reasons why it's been fun getting more into source material. The amount of side quests in Mickey 7 that are not shown in Mickey 17 is a lot. But there's something about getting to watch actors that are highly well cast breathe a new life and dimension into the characters in a way that can only be experienced in the film medium. It's something I really enjoy seeing in adaptations. I will say, though, I don't expect them to keep Ampert's death the way that it was in the book. I mean, they toned down Cato's death in the film adaptation, and he was a villain. He was a career. Ampert? Tiny little baby Ampert in a PG-13? Oh, there's no way. They will soften it by a lot, I'm sure. And even if they don't change how he dies, they'll probably do something like show us nothing of it except for Haymitch's distraught face as he watches it happen, and they'll cut the audio so that the moviegoers don't even have to hear what's happening to Ambert, because it's bad. I mean, you can look up book spoilers if you really want the graphic details, or you could just, read the book. Being that there are double the amount of tributes, I'm not going to go through and attempt to explain all of them, but I will quickly go over the District 12 tribute since that's only 4 characters in total. The other male tribute is Wyatt Callow, played by Ben Wong, whom I have seen in Karate Kid Legends and The Long Walk, which was also directed by Francis Lawrence, who is directing Sunrise on the Reaping after directing all of the other Hunger Games films except for the first one. Wyatt's family organizes betting in District 12, and among other things, they bet on various parts of the Hunger Games, which is dire.
That's gross.
Wyatt is the one who's good at creating the actual odds by factoring in all of the different variables that would be used to determine what actual betting odds are. He's not a bad person, though. He's simply a teenager who's good at statistics. He dies in the games while trying to shield Lulu from being killed. To tell you about Lulu, I must first tell you about Luella McCoy. Luella is one of the girls who was reaped from District 12. She lived near the Abernathys, so she and Haymitch have been good friends since childhood. During the tribute parade, one of the chariots crashed, and as a result, Haymitch was injured and Luella went flying through the air and cracked her head open when she landed. Haymitch is devastated by this, and he doesn't want peacekeepers to take away her body, so he proceeds to pick up her body and run all the way to President Snow's mansion and lays her body in front of it, sarcastically applauding. Sarcastically applauding feels like the spiritual parent of sarcastically bowing, doesn't it? But the Capitol can't exactly have the bad PR of one of their tributes dying in the Capitol before they've even entered the arena, so they bring forth a body double that is heavily implied to be from District 11. She was violently conditioned and trained into mimicking Luella, and she has devices implanted into her. One is in her chest, and it can pump her full of sedatives if sedation is required, and the other is a device in her ear to order her what to say or do if such feedback is necessary to maintain the cover. And finally, we have Maisie Donner, who is played by Mckenna Grace. She is a character who comes from a more affluent part of District 12, which isn't saying much in the broader inequality of the Capitol's affluence compared to all of the districts, but especially District 12. But it's enough affluence to make her into a bit of a mean girl. Not a mean girl in the villainous sense, but more so someone who has a sharp tongue that she is known for. Though over the course of the story, she is repeatedly shown to have a good heart underneath all of that. She is one of the last surviving tributes along with Haymitch in the 50th Hunger Games. One of the most fun things about this character is her tough bravado, because she gets into it with Drusilla, who is played by Glenn Close in the film. Drusilla is the chaperone for District 12, which is the job we see Effie Trinket have in the original Hunger Games stories. Drusilla is a lot. She's unkind, and she's married to Magno, although they seem to have a very weird relationship. I mean, do they even like each other? Why don't they just get divorced? Who can really say? They don't unpack all of those dynamics in that relationship in the story. Maisie is also the one who had the Mockingjay pin that Katniss gets in the original trilogy. The pin had been made by Tam Amber, who is one of Lenore's uncles that has adopted and raised her since she was a child. To give you a very abbreviated version of Haymitch's time in the arena, he goes off on his own for a bit. He nearly dies from poisoning because most of the arena is poisonous. He is found by Lulu. She dies. He meets up with Ambert, who dies after they are able to set off the explosion, though it wasn't enough to accomplish what was originally intended. Then Haymitch reunites with Maisie Donner, and they survive together for a bit, but right after they decide to separate, since they had each wanted to do different things at that point, but also neither of them wanted to end up in a position of having to kill the other one, Haymitch hears Maisie screaming, and upon rushing to check on her, he finds that she's being fatally attacked by mutts. Haymitch seeks out a young tribute named Welly, who is one of the only remaining tributes that's alive. She is a very young child, and she was part of the large alliance that had originally been formed by Ampert, as he had believed that with enough people banding together, they could outnumber the careers and win. It's very the people united will never be defeated, and that's how you know Ampert comes from a rebellion upbringing. He knows what's what. But Welly is killed by Silka, the only career alive at that point, and Haymitch is able to win against Silka because Haymitch had discovered that at the edge of the arena there was a safety system in place so that if anything were to fall off the side of the cliff, it would eventually shoot back up. He's badly wounded by this point, but he makes it back to this cliff's edge, so this way, when Silka throws her axe at him, he collapses from his wounds, and so she misses him. Her axe flies over the cliff, and after a moment, it flies back up and kills her. Finally, Haymitch attempts to blow up the generator with the remaining supplies he had. After Haymitch is taken out of the arena, he is held captive. His injuries are healed as much as is possible at this point. He's upset to learn that the games were heavily edited to remove all of the camaraderie he had with various other tributes that he was close with. The humanity, the rebellious stunts, his defiance, all of that was censored out of the storyline of the broadcast. He also finds that Wyrus and Mags have been tortured. Beatty was left alive because his skills are too valuable to the capital. Haymitch returns home after being warned by Snow to enjoy his homecoming. Haymitch returns to 12, arson, dead family, funeral, poisoned gumdrops, the death of Lenore Dove, don't let the sun rise on the reaping. Plutarch tries to reach out to Haymitch again once he's on his victory tour because Plutarch still wants the rebellion to happen. He wants to overthrow the capital. Haymitch doesn't trust Plutarch because the rebellion failed and Haymitch lost everyone he loved, but Plutarch points out that now Snow has no leverage against Haymitch. Still, Haymitch is devastated and begins his path towards becoming the drunk that we met in the original trilogy. Also, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but before he left for the Hunger Games, Haymitch had a part-time job helping a bootlegger named Hattie to make liquor. It's illegal, but the peacekeepers are customers, so they don't take the time to shut down the operation. Finally, we get the epilogue I mentioned before about Haymitch finally opening up to Katniss and Peeta about his whole story, the one that readers have just read in the book. Katniss gives him the geese, and he imagines that Lenore Dove's spirit has been with him all of that time. Now, despite however long this video ends up being, I've given you a much more condensed overview of this story. If you truly want to know all of the details, the lore, every single plot development, you really should just read the book. You've got enough time to fit this in, as well as all of the other books, before this new film adaptation gets released. I also haven't mentioned Joseph Zada before this, but I saw him in We Were Liars, as that was a show I had received early screeners for, so I reviewed it. I haven't read that book though, but he played the emotional range of what he was given quite well, and considering how they're showing him in the teaser trailer, yeah, I don't really have any concerns about his ability to play the part. Still, as I've already said, I'm here to first and foremost watch the rebels doing rebellion, Kelvin Harrison Jr., Jesse Plemons, Lily Taylor, and Maya Hawke versus Ray Fiennes. That's the movie I'm seated opening weekend for.